They thought they could stick me in seat 42E, and I would just smile and be grateful. What they didn't know was that 75 years of life had taught me exactly how much a middle seat in the last row was worth, and it wasn't my dignity. My name is Eleanor Vance, and this is the story of how I discovered that my own daughter had been stealing my identity for 6 months, and what I did about it, 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. It started with what seemed like the sweetest gesture. My daughter Chloe called me on a Tuesday evening, her face bright on my laptop screen next to her husband Marcus. They were both beaming with that particular kind of excitement that made my accountant's instincts twitch with suspicion. Marcus leaned into the camera with his practiced entrepreneur smile. "Mom, we have the most incredible surprise for you. We're taking the whole family to Hawaii next month. Everything's already arranged, first-class treatment all the way." Chloe jumped in, her voice honey-sweet but carrying that slight condescending tone I'd grown used to over the years. "We used our accumulated points, Mom. You know how good we are with those travel rewards programs. You won't have to worry about a single thing." Something about the way Marcus's eyes darted to Chloe when he mentioned first-class treatment made my chest tighten. After 43 years as a chief financial officer, I'd learned to trust those little moments, when numbers didn't quite add up, when people's eyes said something different from their mouths. But I smiled and thanked them, because that's what mothers do. That's what I'd been doing for the past 5 years since my husband Robert passed away, accepting whatever crumbs of attention my successful daughter could spare for her outdated mother. The email confirmation arrived the next morning, while I was having my coffee and reading the financial news, a habit that dies hard even in retirement. I opened it expecting to see my seat assignment, maybe wondering if they'd managed to get us all together in first class. What I saw made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. Chloe, Marcus, and their 2 children were indeed in first class. Seats 1A through 1D. My seat assignment read 42E, middle seat, last row, right next to the bathroom. I sat there staring at the screen for a full minute, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my stomach. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a computer glitch. This was deliberate. My phone buzzed with a text from my 16-year-old grandson, Leo. "Grandma, are you okay with your seat assignment? I heard Dad and Mom laughing about it last night. Dad said something about teaching you not to expect handouts." It made me feel sick. That text was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. All the little comments over the years suddenly made sense. The way Marcus would smirk when I offered to pay for dinner. The way Chloe would pat my hand and tell me not to worry about modern technology because it was too complicated for someone my age. The way they'd exchange glances when I talked about anything more complex than the weather. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Instead of calling Chloe to ask about the seating arrangement, instead of meekly accepting that maybe they really had done their best with points and upgrades, I did what any former CFO would do. I pulled my own credit report. I went straight to Experian's website and logged into my account, something I did quarterly, out of habit. The list of accounts that appeared made my blood run cold. There, 6 months old, was a credit card I'd never applied for. A Platinum SkyMiles card with a $25,000 limit, 90% of which had been used. The billing address was my home, but the shipping address for all purchases was Chloe and Marcus's house across town. I clicked through the transaction history with shaking hands. Weekend getaways to Napa Valley, designer handbags, electronics, a home theater system. 6 months of living the high life on my pristine credit score, the one Robert and I had spent 4 decades building together. The room seemed to spin for a moment. This wasn't just favoritism or lack of consideration. This was identity theft. This was fraud. This was my own daughter and her husband treating me like a resource to be exploited, not a person to be loved. I called David Chen before I called anyone else. David had been Robert's law partner and best friend. And in the 5 years since Robert's death, he'd become my most trusted advisor. When I told him what I'd found, his response was immediate and unequivocal. Eleanor, this isn't a family misunderstanding. This is credit fraud. A federal crime. They've been using your excellent credit rating, the one you and Robert built over a lifetime, as their personal piggy bank. How do you want to handle this? I want them to understand that wisdom doesn't have an expiration date, I told him, and I want them to learn that respect isn't optional. David helped me craft a plan that was both legally sound and emotionally satisfying. First, I would upgrade my own ticket to first class using my own money. Then, I would report the fraudulent credit card to the airline's security division. Finally, once we were airborne and the plane reached cruising altitude, I would have the bank freeze the stolen card, rendering it useless for the remainder of their trip. The morning of the flight, I dressed carefully in my best traveling suit. The navy blue one, with the silk scarf that Robert always said, made me look like a woman who meant business. I arrived at the airport 2 hours early and walked directly to the first-class check-in counter. The gate agent, a professional woman about Chloe's age, looked at my original boarding pass and then at the identification and credit card I presented. I'd like to upgrade this seat to first class, I said calmly, and I need to report that the original booking was made with a credit card opened fraudulently in my name. I have documentation, and my attorney has already filed the appropriate reports. Her eyes widened as she processed what I was telling her. She made several phone calls, upgraded my seat to 1F, and added a security note to our flight record. When she handed me my new boarding pass, she looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Have a wonderful flight, Mrs. Vance, and I hope everything works out with your situation. 2 hours later, I was settled in my first-class seat with a glass of champagne when Chloe, Marcus, and their children walked past on their way to coach. The look on their faces when they saw me sitting there was worth every penny I'd spent on the upgrade. Chloe recovered first, rushing over to my seat with a forced smile and frantic eyes. Mom, what are you doing here? Is this some kind of joke? I took a sip of my champagne and looked up at her calmly. No, sweetheart. This is called self-respect. It's a luxury even more expensive than first-class tickets. Marcus appeared behind her, his face flushed and angry. You can't just change your seat without telling us. We had this whole trip planned out. You had it planned out perfectly. I agreed, right down to the seat next to the bathroom. Unfortunately, I decided I preferred a different view. They were forced to continue to their seats as other passengers needed to board. But I could see Marcus gesturing angrily as they walked away. Chloe kept looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. 1 hour into the flight, as we flew over the Nevada desert, Marcus tried to buy Wi-Fi access so he could work. His card was declined. He tried again. Declined. He called the flight attendant, his voice getting progressively louder as he demanded to know why his platinum card wasn't working. That's when the head flight attendant, a distinguished man with 20 years of experience, written in the calm authority of his voice, appeared at Marcus's seat. The entire business class cabin could hear every word he said. Sir, we've received notification from our payment processing center that the credit card used to purchase your family's tickets has been frozen due to a fraud report. The charges have been reversed. You'll need to provide alternative payment for the full cost of your tickets when we land, or we'll need to involve airport security. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see other passengers turning in their seats, some trying to hide their interest, others openly staring. Marcus's face went through several shades of red before settling on an unhealthy purple. Chloe was frantically whispering to him, but I could catch fragments of their conversation. She kept saying things like, "How is this possible? And we need to call Mom, and this has to be a mistake." Meanwhile, their children sat in mortified silence. My granddaughter Emma, 13, and already socially conscious, was sinking lower in her seat with every passing moment. But it was Leo's reaction that broke my heart a little. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched in a way that reminded me painfully of his grandfather. The flight attendants, following protocol, suspended all services to their seats. No meals, no drinks, no entertainment system access. For the remaining 4 hours of the flight, Marcus and Chloe sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence, while I enjoyed a lovely meal and caught up on some reading. When we began our descent into Honolulu, I could see Marcus on his phone, probably trying to reach his bank or find some way to cover the $20,000 in tickets they now owed. From what I could overhear, he wasn't having much success. As we touched down and taxied to the gate, 2 airline security officers boarded the plane and made their way directly to Marcus and Chloe's row. The conversation was brief and professional, but the result was clear. While other passengers deplaned normally, my daughter and her family were escorted to a private office to resolve their payment issues. I gathered my carry-on bag and walked past their row, where Leo sat looking absolutely miserable. I caught his eye and gave him a small wink. The corners of his mouth turned up just slightly, in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Outside the airport, my pre-arranged luxury car was waiting to take me to the Grand Wailea, one of the most beautiful resorts on Maui. As we drove through the tropical landscape, my phone rang. Chloe's number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I answered on the 4th call, putting it on speaker, so David, who I'd conferenced in from California, could hear everything. "Mom!" Chloe's voice was high and strained. "Mom, what have you done? Marcus can't pay for the tickets. Our hotel reservation got canceled because the card was frozen. We're stuck at the airport with nowhere to go." Her voice broke on the last words, and despite everything, I felt a familiar pang of maternal concern. But David's presence on the call reminded me to stay strong. "Chloe," I said quietly, "this isn't something I did to you. This is the consequence of what you did to me. You committed credit card fraud, which is a serious federal crime. The only reason you're not already in handcuffs is because I haven't decided whether to press charges." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Marcus's voice came through, shaky and desperate. "Eleanor, please, we can work this out. We'll pay back every penny. We didn't think. We just needed some help getting back on our feet after Marcus's startup failed." "You needed help," I repeated slowly. "So you decided to help yourselves to my identity, my credit, and my financial security, without asking, without telling me, while treating me like a burden. You couldn't wait to stick in the worst seat on the plane." David's voice cut through the conversation with professional precision. "This is David Chen, Mrs. Vance's attorney. We've prepared a settlement agreement that can resolve this matter without criminal prosecution. You'll admit in writing to the identity theft and fraud. You'll repay every cent with 20% penalties, which will be placed in a trust fund for Leo's college education. And you'll attend financial counseling and family therapy. If you refuse any part of this agreement, Mrs. Vance will pursue full criminal charges." I could hear muffled arguing in the background before Chloe came back on the line, her voice small and defeated. "We agree to everything. We just need help getting home. That's where Leo comes in," I said. Because by that point, my grandson had left the airport and found his way to my resort. He'd taken a taxi with the emergency money I'd taught him to keep in his wallet. A lesson that apparently stuck better with him than with his parents. When I opened my hotel room door and saw Leo standing there with tears in his eyes, everything else faded away. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug that felt like forgiveness and apology, all rolled into one. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," he whispered. I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it. Over the next 3 days, while Marcus and Chloe struggled to arrange budget flights home on their maxed-out credit cards, Leo and I had the vacation of a lifetime. We went snorkeling in Molokini Crater. We watched the sunrise from Haleakala. We learned to paddleboard in the calm waters off Wailea Beach. More importantly, We talked, really talked, in a way that hadn't happened in years. Leo told me about the pressure he felt to succeed, about his dreams of studying environmental science, about his embarrassment over his parents' financial struggles, and the way they'd been treating me. I told him about his grandfather, about the decades we'd spent building a life together, about the importance of integrity and respect in relationships. I told him that love without respect isn't really love at all, and that family members should lift each other up, not tear each other down. On our last day, as we sat watching the sunset from the beach, Leo asked me something that had been weighing on his mind. "Grandma, are you going to forgive them?" I considered the question carefully, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. "Forgiveness isn't something you give once and it's done forever," I told him. "It's something you choose to do every day, and it has to go both ways. Your parents need to understand what they did wrong and work to rebuild the trust they broke. I need to learn to set boundaries and protect myself while still loving my family. That's going to take time for all of us." When we returned home, Marcus and Chloe had already signed David's settlement agreement. They'd sold Marcus's fancy car to help pay their debts, and Chloe had gotten a job at an accounting firm, using skills she'd let rust over the years. The $25,000 they owed me, plus penalties, would be paid back over 2 years. More importantly, they'd started family therapy, not because the legal agreement required it, though it did, but because Leo had refused to come home until they agreed to work on their problems with a professional. The first family session was awkward and painful. Marcus spent most of it making excuses and deflecting responsibility. Chloe cried and apologized, but her apologies felt hollow, more about her guilt than about understanding the harm she'd caused. But gradually, over months of weekly sessions, something began to shift. Marcus began to acknowledge that his business failures and financial stress didn't justify fraud. Chloe started to see how she'd been treating me not as a mother to be honored, but as a problem to be managed. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped me understand that I'd been enabling some of their behavior by never setting clear boundaries, by always being available to help without question, by accepting disrespect in the name of family harmony. It wasn't my fault that they'd chosen to steal from me, but I could take responsibility for my part in allowing our relationships to become so unbalanced. I learned to say no. I learned to ask for what I needed instead of hoping they'd figure it out. I learned that love and boundaries weren't opposites, but partners. The breakthrough came about 8 months after Hawaii, during what had started as a routine family dinner. Chloe had been telling me about a problem at work, and I offered some advice based on my decades of financial experience. Instead of dismissing it or explaining why it wouldn't work, she listened, really listened. Then she thanked me and asked follow-up questions. Later, as we were cleaning up, she stopped me in the kitchen and said something I'd been waiting years to hear. "Mom, I'm sorry I haven't been treating you like the intelligent, capable woman you are. I got so caught up in thinking of you as someone who needed taking care of that I forgot you're someone I could learn from." That apology meant more than all the money they'd paid back, more than the legal settlements and therapy sessions. It meant my daughter finally saw me as a person worthy of respect. Today, 2 years later, our relationships have found a new balance. Marcus still struggles with his ego sometimes, but he's learned to ask for advice instead of assuming he knows better. Chloe and I have coffee every Tuesday morning, and she's started bringing me in as a consultant for some of her more complex client cases. Leo is thriving in his senior year of high school, and his college fund, built from the penalties his parents paid for their fraud, will ensure he can pursue his environmental science dreams without the financial stress that derailed his father. As for me, I've discovered that retirement doesn't have to mean irrelevance. I've started volunteering as a financial literacy counselor for seniors, helping others recognize and protect themselves from elder fraud. It turns out that my years of experience, combined with my first-hand knowledge of how family members can exploit trust, make me particularly effective at this work. I still think about that airplane seat sometimes. 42E, middle row, next to the bathroom. It was supposed to be a message about my place in the family hierarchy. A reminder that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they chose to give me. Instead, it became the catalyst for reclaiming my dignity and rebuilding my relationships on a foundation of mutual respect. Sometimes the worst seats offer the best views, if you're willing to change your perspective. Last month, Leo sent me a postcard from his senior class trip to Washington, D.C. On the back, he'd written just one sentence. "Thank you for showing me what self-respect looks like. Grandma." I keep that postcard on my refrigerator, next to a photo from our Hawaii trip, the one where we're both grinning on our paddleboards with the sunset behind us. It reminds me every day that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to accept less than you deserve. They thought seat 42E would put me in my place. What they didn't realize was that my place was never at the back of the plane to begin with. It took me 75 years to fully understand that truth. But understanding it changed everything. The funny thing about respect is that you can't demand it from others until you demand it from yourself. Once you do, the world has a way of reorganizing itself around that new reality, even at 35,000 feet, even in the middle seat. Even when the people who are supposed to love you most have forgotten how to show it. Sometimes you have to teach them all over again. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very persistent, they're still willing to learn.